The following broadcast is a presentation of Mount Zion Media Ministry.
Today I want to preach from the subject, the power of resilience. The power of resilience. On Wednesday night, Minister Dr. Reverend Fonda Thompson introduced you to a man named Saul. And I wanted you to see him Wednesday night because he is the focus of our message today. But he's not that same Saul, the persecutor of the church that you met in Acts chapter 9. He is now the premier, the preeminent leader of the church. The Paul that I introduce you to today, did more for the early Christian church than any of the other apostles. You look at the book of Acts, it's called the Acts of the Apostles. But half of the book is about the ministry and life of the Apostle Paul. Those first 9 or 10 chapters are about the other 12, and basically Peter and James and Mark, a few others. But after Paul is converted and begins his ministry, he becomes so prominent in the ministry of spreading the gospel to all the world that the book records his story only and not the others. And not only is the book of Acts dedicated to him, but when you look at his contributions as a writer, 27 books in the New Testament, 13 written by him. Some believe that Hebrews were written by him. And if you believe that, then 14 of the 27 books he wrote. You look at the early churches and who organized them and who founded them. Those that we have recorded in the book of Acts and in the church history, an untold number were founded by the Apostle Paul. And then you look at the men and the women that he mentored and discipled in the faith and the work that they did. His impact is priceless. And even today, we don't know the full impact of his ministry, and we won't know until we get to heaven. And I lift up his accomplishments to you because when we read about the stories, the histories of people who made major impacts on the world, we are often sometimes tempted to believe that God was just with them all the time and they got through this without any kind of struggle and they just did it because of favor, because of this, because of that. But I want to use Paul's life to say today that Paul represents all of us, and all of us are represented in Paul. He was Saul, the chief sinner, who was not in the business of working, serving God. But on the Damascus road, he was changed. He was converted. And from that point on, he began his life and mission of serving God. And he didn't have a smooth road to do it. Let me show you something in this text, and I want to point out one of those difficulties that Paul had to deal with, that you and I have to deal with. And there's a lesson in it for us. I read chapter 14 1,000 or more times. But this time, there were 3 words in it that just caught me, gripped me, and I couldn't get away from them. And it's in verse 20. those three words, the next day. The next day. Those words jumped off the page, caught me. Caught my eyes and just laser focus on them the next day. Caught my mind the next day. What are you saying, Paul? Why, God, are you calling me to these three words? And here it is. In this chapter, what you have is the Apostle Paul in this particular reading. He is in a city called Lystra. And as he is ministering, and one of the things he does is heal a lame man, and he's preaching and teaching, and you would think that the people in the city would be happy that the lame man was healed. He's preaching and teaching, but instead, they are led by some outsiders to turn on Paul. Look, if you will, at verse number 8. In verse number 8, you see where the man was healed. All right, and again, looked like people would have been happy. And then the people thought that Paul and Barnabas was God because of the way that they were preaching. And that's what follows in verse 11, 12, 13, and 14. I mean, they're just doing all of these wonderful works. And then you come down to verse 19, and then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium. And what did they do? They won the crowd over. The same crowd in those previous verses that were on Paul's side. They thought he was God. They thought Silas was God. They just thought they were the best thing to come to their town. They let some outsiders come and infiltrate the worship experience and put some negative thoughts in their mind about Paul. Isn't it strange how folk flip on you? Isn't it strange how they see what you're doing, but all somebody got to do is come with a negative report, and all of a sudden, they flip on you. And the reason they came from Antioch and Iconium is because when Paul came in those cities, they tried to stop him but couldn't. And so they follow him. And then look what happened. They stoned Paul. And they dragged him to the end of the city. And we're not familiar with that language in the 21st century, so let me just give it to you. In Paul's day, as punishment, they would literally pick up stones as big as they could pick up, throw you on the ground, and then throw the stones until they kill you. If you remember, Stephen, one of the deacons of the church, was stoned to death. And so they take the stones and they stone Paul until they think he is dead. And the people at the church, they watch as they stone him, but they don't try to stop him. I can't figure that out. They knew he was innocent. They could have interfered, but instead they said passively by and let the folks stone him. And then after the people leave, they gather around him to pick him up to bury him. Watch them stone you, then come pick you up to bury you. I hope I got some church folk. If somebody come to stone me, I hope I got some help, because you can count on me. When they come to stone you, I'm not going to sit back, let them stone you to death, and then bury you. Let me move on here. And so they gathered around him, and then Paul stood up. I'm not dead after all. And what makes those three words important is that he got up, went into the city, and then it says, and the next day. Here is the importance. God is trying to say to us this morning, the most important thing in the text, the most important concern we ought to have as we study this experience in Paul's life, is not what happened to him. It's not the stoning. As evil as the stoning was, the important thing is what you do next. The stoning happened, he couldn't change that. The stoning happened, he didn't have no control over the people. He couldn't stop them. He was outnumbered. They stoned him. They left him for dead. No control over that. And all the crying, all the thinking, all the finger pointing in the world wasn't going to change a thing. It happened. And now the question is, what does he do next? He had no choice in the stoning, but he has the freedom to choose what comes next. I'm trying to talk to somebody today who's stuck in the stoning when you ought to be looking at what's next. Look at verse 21. And so what was next for him? The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. And what did they do when they got to Derbe? Verse 21, they preached the gospel in the city and won a large number of disciples. The thing he got stoning for, let me say it again, the thing he was stoned for, the next day he went to another city and started doing the same thing. And it doesn't say how long he stayed there, but listen. Then, after being in that city for a while, preaching and winning many disciples, look what he did. He went back to Lystra, where he was stoned, back to Iconium and Antioch, where the haters came from. You start doing the same thing. They were stoning you to stop you. And yet you come back, start preaching and experience more success, winning disciples, and then you got the nerve to go back to Lystra, Antioch, and Iconium to do the same thing again. What is that? There's one word. It's called resilience. It's the ability to bounce back. Resilience. It's when you get up, when you've been knocked down. It's resilience. You take a licking and keep on ticking. It's resilience when they stone you and leave for dead, and your friends come to bury you, and you get up and say, "Excuse me, I got to go somewhere." Whew. It's resilience. And listen, you may think that Paul's resilience was a one-time thing, but it's part of who he is. Let me read something to you from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and I'm going to read from the New Living Translation because it makes it plain. Beginning at verse 22, and here's the context. Paul, again, is on the attack. The other apostles think they're better than Paul, and so they are going around discrediting him, telling the members of the church at Corinth that he's not a legitimate apostle because he didn't start out with us, and he preaches a gospel that's different from us. And listen, they said he can't preach, he can't sing, you don't really need to pay attention to him. He's not eloquent. And then again, the church people brought into that. And so now they are discounting the ministry of Paul. And so Paul is defending his ministry. And listen to part of what he says. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I know I sound like a madman, but I served him far more. Listen, I have worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. That means they whipped him across his back 5 different times with 39 lashes from a whip. 3 times I was beaten with rods. That's Rodney King right there, y'all. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many journeys. I have faced dangers from the rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the sea. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to warm me. Then besides all this, the daily burden of my concern for all the churches, who is weak without my feeling that weakness, who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger. If I must boast, I would rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is worthy of eternal praise, knows I am not lying. When I was in Damascus, that's where we were Friday. When I was in Damascus, the governor under the king Arterius kept guard at the city gates to catch me. I had to be lowered in a basket through a window in the city wall to escape him. That's a partial enumeration of the stuff that Paul went through. What's on your list? So it wasn't just the stoning in Lystra that he demonstrated his resilience, but it was throughout his ministry. He was always being knocked, always being challenged. But every time he just came back. Let me pause right here to bridge this gap between the text and our current reality. 12 months ago today, the second Sunday in March, I stood in this pulpit when I should have been home because on February 27th, I fell and fractured my hip. And my good Dr. Fussell told me I needed to be home and in rehab for 9 weeks. But I couldn't do that, and so I came on back to church. I could, but I didn't want to. How about that? My resilience got me up. And so I was standing here not knowing that would be the end of worship for a period of time, because on Wednesday I would start getting calls from Dr. Satchel, from Dr. Hurd, from Scott Steiner at the hospital, from our coroner, Pastor Simmons. There's an outbreak in town called COVID-19 coronavirus, and you don't need to have church. And something in me said, we can't stop having church. I can't listen to that. But after prayer and further conversation with Dr. Thompson, Dr. Glover, Dr. Satchel, and Dr. Hurd, we put the word out that we would not be having service. And not only was the service interrupted, but our lives were interrupted. And we've been through something that knocked us down, slapped us upside the head, broke our hearts, climbed in our window, stole our loved ones, stole our peace, stole our serenities, that robbed us of life as we know it. And the last 12 months have been unprecedented in the kind of challenges we have had. But I simply want to say, touch yourself. You're still here. And I'm not minimizing who we lost, what we lost, but what I am saying is, in spite of who we lost, what we lost, and all that we've been through, there is a demonstration of resilience. And we're standing here all because God has been good to us. And so, I want to say to Andrea Stevenson and to my friend, the Cox Phillips down there in Bainbridge, Georgia, and to all of you, we're standing here because of resilience. And I need to say to you, it's not just COVID-19, but even before that, we've been getting knocks and bruises. And we have been a people that demonstrated resilience. And so wherever you are in life, now look back over what you've come through and what you have to see, that in all of the setbacks and all of the stuff you've come through, the power of resilience has been a manifestation in your life. And at least I keep you too long. Let me just tell you right now, I had a talk with the Apostle Paul. I said, Paul, I need you to help me. And God, I need you to help me understand what Paul is saying. How did you get that resilience? Where did that resilience come from? And I'm so glad that Paul honored me by talking back to me. So here it is. First of all, this is what the Apostle Paul told me through the Holy Spirit as we talk, how God connected us together and we can talk. He said, I was able to demonstrate the resilience that you saw. The power in the resilience you saw, it began with a double commitment to God. A double commitment to God is where it all began. It began when on the Damascus Road, I made a commitment to God to be his apostle, to be his servant. And that commitment to him was greater than my commitment to my own comfort. Because if I had been committed to my comfort, I would have thrown the towel in a long time ago. My commitment to him was greater than my feelings, because people have hurt my feeling. Even as I've been in the church and doing ministry, but my commitment to him was greater than my feeling. If I was committed to my livelihood and to my economic well-being, I would have quit, because I've had to do without any kind of support. But I was committed to God. Before God, I was committed to persecuting him and the church. But after my Damascus Road experience, I committed myself to him. And then here's the double commitment. Then I committed myself to the commitment I made to God. In case that commitment ever got a little weak in my spirit, I committed myself to the commitment. And I'm trying to tell you that until you commit yourself to God, and then be committed to your commitment to God, you're not going to be able to have this kind of resilience that Paul talked about. And you want this resilience because there's power in it. And listen, don't miss what Paul said. Your commitment to God has to be greater than your commitment to anything and anybody else. No man, no woman, no comfort, no hurt feelings, and go on and on. Your commitment to God must be there. And listen, you can't fool God. He knows where your commitment is. And then you got to commit. You got to commit to the commitment. And secondly, as I move on, Paul said, I had a double commitment to the cause of Christ. And when God called him, he called him to a cause. And that cause was the cause of Christ. And it is to finish the work of Christ and taking the gospel to the world. And Paul had a special assignment to the Gentile world. And so his cause, the cause of Christ, was to take the gospel to the Gentile world. And Paul says, I was committed to that cause. And the double commitment, he was committed to his commitment to the cause. And what you see in his going in all of the missionary journeys, in his prolific writing, in his prolific work in ministry, what you see is a man who is committed. Let me tell you something. You don't measure a person's commitment by what they say, but you measure commitment by the evidence of the work. Let's go back to basketball. If you talk to these coaches and players, what they will tell you is that what you've seen this season in terms of success didn't just happen when they started practicing back in the fall. But after the season ended last year, the people who were committed to the cause of becoming champions, they were somewhere in a gym. And all summer long, they were in a gym. And they were practicing, and they were getting in shape, and they were strengthening themselves and preparing themselves because they were ready. I've got a friend, and her son wanted to play basketball, and he did. And she said, he's not committed. I said, how did, but he say, I said, just observing. How many times you see him with a basketball in his hand? She said, a person that's committed to basketball, when you see him, you see him, he's in his room playing video games. A commitment to basketball will put him out there on the court. He's all by himself. He's shooting free throws. He's working on this, working on that. And so, and your commitment to God is evidence too, not in what you say, but in what you do. So Paul says, I was committed to the cause. How committed are you to the cause? Because listen, your commitment to God, that double commitment, and your commitment to the cause of Christ obligates him to be committed to you. And that's the third thing Paul told me. He said, I believed in God's commitment to me. Why should God be committed to you? He saved you. I'm not talking about your relationship, but I'm talking about the productivity in your life. When you are not committed to him. Why should he commit his resources to you when you are not committed to him? So Paul says, I'm committed to him, but I'm also in a position where I'm firmly fixed that I believe in God's commitment to me. When he promised to be with me, to never leave me, not forsake me, I believe that. And I believe that God is committed to what he said, and he will not forsake me. And everything that God promised, everything that God wants to do, I believe that God is committed to me. And then I said, Paul, show me how that worked. He said, well, see, when you look at me, and you look at my outward appearance, you think my resilience is in me. But the resilience is in God. It's in God. He's the one. He's the one. And so after he showed it to me, I called Tim Hunter to come help me. And so I want Tim to come up here and help me. And I'm going to tell you what Paul told me. Yeah. As Tim bounced the ball, Paul said, see, Simmons, this is what you got to understand. That basketball represents resilience. Every time it hit the floor and comes back up to Tim's hand, that's the capacity of the ball to bounce back. And what I need you to understand is, it's not the ball that's doing the bouncing.
Thanks for watching. Be blessed and continue walking in the light.